The terminal lights of O'Hare International glimmered like scattered stars on wet pavement as Emma Nolan hustled through the crowded concourse, her roller bag scraping behind her. The flight had been a last-minute booking, a blink-of-an-eye decision she had made after a week of grueling simulator training. Her uniform blazer, wrinkled from overnight travel, clung to her shoulders like armor she didn't want to wear but couldn't remove. The airport smelled of stale coffee, jet fuel, and faint perfume, the odd combination that somehow felt comforting, familiar, almost like the backdrop to every adventure she had ever reluctantly agreed to. She navigated past families laden with carry-ons, couples whispering in hushed tones, teenagers absorbed in their screens. Her boarding pass glimmered under the fluorescent lights. Row 13, seat F. Not that she believed in omens, but the number sent a ripple of unease down her spine. Row 13. Superstitions aside, it was just another seat, another cramped space in the metallic belly of a plane that would carry her through clouds and sky. But that night, as the sun dipped behind the skyline, Row 13 would become a pivot point between ordinary life and something far more extraordinary. The flight attendants were the first to notice her fatigue. One offered a polite smile, mistaking her weariness for routine travel exhaustion. Emma nodded absent-mindedly, dragging her suitcase along the narrow aisle and sliding into the window seat. Outside, the sky was a bruised canvas, deep purples and fiery oranges bleeding into one another as the sun surrendered to the night. She watched the horizon blur, mesmerized, eyelids heavy, brain shutting down in protest after weeks of relentless drills and simulations. For months, she had been training in fighter jets, executing emergency maneuvers in virtual skis, anticipating threats she prayed she'd never encounter in real life. Now, in a commercial airliner, she felt like a dormant storm. The hum of the engines vibrated softly beneath the cabin, a lullaby of mechanical precision. Around her, passengers adjusted themselves for the journey. A young mother soothed a squirming toddler, a businessman flipped open his laptop for a last round of emails, a pair of elderly travelers shared a small bottle of water and quiet laughter. The world outside moved in slow motion, clouds drifting, streetlights twinkling far below. But inside, time was measured differently. Emma could feel it in the tightness of her chest, the slight tremor in her fingers. Her body wanted sleep, her mind resisted, whispering reminders of procedures, protocols, and the sheer weight of responsibility that came with knowing how to fly machines that could kill or save. As the flight attendants went through their routine checking seatbelts, demonstrating oxygen masks, reviewing safety instructions, Emma's eyes fluttered shut. She imagined herself somewhere else, a cockpit, instruments blinking under harsh fluorescent lights, radar screens pulsing with vital data. Her trainer's voice echoed in her memory. Every decision counts. Every second matters. Hesitation is deadly. She shivered, pulling the blanket provided by the airline over her shoulders, cocooning herself in the illusion of comfort. Outside, the clouds thickened, darkening the horizon. The occasional flicker of lightning in the distance sent a subtle jolt through the fuselage. A child's whimper, the low rumble of the engines, the creak of luggage compartments settling. These minor disturbances might have gone unnoticed by anyone else. But Emma's senses were trained to notice, to anticipate, to calculate. In her mind, the plane was already in motion through treacherous skis, a beast she both revered and feared. Her lips pressed into a thin line. She would sleep only for a heartbeat. She could feel that something was coming, though she didn't yet know what. The captain's voice finally came over the intercom, calm yet carrying a subtle undercurrent of tension. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. We are expecting clear skies for departure, but as always, please remain seated and fasten your seatbelts. We'll keep you updated." The usual monotone of airline announcements barely registered in Emma's half-conscious mind. Her eyes snapped open briefly, scanning the cabin, noting the nervous flutter of a young woman checking her phone, the drooping posture of a businessman already falling asleep, the muted hum of anxiety floating in the recycled air. Row 13, seat F, felt different now, not unlucky, not ordinary, but significant. Emma's heart rate quickened. She shook her head lightly, trying to dismiss the gnawing sense of premonition. It was absurd. Superstition and training clashed in the quiet theater of her mind. She inhaled deeply, letting the smell of jet fuel and polished metal fill her lungs. The vibration of the engines thrummed against her bones, a subtle reminder that gravity and momentum governed everything in this enclosed, suspended world. The plane lurched as it taxied down the runway. Emma gripped the armrest, knuckles whitening as the engines roared to life. Outside, the city lights blurred, smeared by the speed and angle of ascent. The hum became a roar, a living pulse beneath her seat, vibrating in sync with her heart. She closed her eyes, imagining the cockpit, the instruments, the unyielding responsibility of flight. She had trained for emergencies, for systems failures, for the impossible, but this was reality. And reality, she realized, was always louder, sharper, and far more merciless than any simulation. A young boy in the row ahead pressed his forehead against the window, mesmerized by the clouds lit with the last embers of sunset. The mother beside him whispered assurances, oblivious to the intensity that throbbed just a few rows back, where Emma sat, mind oscillating between exhaustion and hyper-awareness. The plane's ascent smoothed, but the storm clouds at the horizon seemed to pulse, as if aware of the lives packed tightly inside the metal cylinder hurtling toward the sky. Emma's thoughts drifted to her own life, a blur of rigorous discipline, sacrifices, and unspoken fears. She had chosen a path few women dared, flying machines capable of unmatched destruction, mastering instruments that demanded respect, skill, and intuition. And yet here she was, anonymous among strangers, a mere passenger on a routine flight, her extraordinary life hidden beneath casual clothing and a travel pillow. The irony wasn't lost on her. As the plane leveled off, the captain's voice returned, breaking the monotony. "We'll be cruising at 30,000 feet shortly. Enjoy the flight." The casual tone, meant to reassure, did the opposite for Emma. Her instincts screamed that this ordinary flight was no longer ordinary. Every fiber of her being pulsed with anticipation, a simmering awareness that would not allow her to drift fully into sleep. She adjusted the blanket around her shoulders, inhaled slowly, and tried to ground herself in the mundane act of breathing. But it was useless. Something was coming, something beyond her immediate perception. And then, almost imperceptibly, a new tension slid into the cabin. The hum of engines was no longer comforting. It carried a subtle irregularity, a flicker of instability. Passengers shifted uncomfortably. Outside, the clouds grew denser, almost tangible in their thickness, writhing like smoke across a blackened sky. Emma's eyes narrowed. She felt it in her gut, the sudden prickling sense that the ordinary had ended, that the fragile thread separating safety from chaos was about to snap. It happened in a blink. The intercom crackled, cutting through the cabin with unnerving clarity. "Ladies and gentlemen, if there is anyone aboard with pilot experience, please identify yourself immediately." The words sliced through the hum of the engines, through the low murmur of passengers, through the comforting illusion of a routine flight. Heads turned. Whispers erupted like sparks along dry grass. Emma froze, heart hammering against her ribs. She blinked, disoriented. Her instincts screamed. This was no drill, no casual inquiry, no joke. This was a call for action. The world seemed to tilt, the cabin noise receding into a hollow echo. Emma Nolan, seated in row 13, seat F, suddenly realized that the ordinary seat she had chosen, the routine flight she had dismissed, had become the epicenter of a potential disaster. Her training, her months of preparation, her life as a pilot, all of it, had led to this exact moment, suspended high above the earth, in the belly of a metal bird that could not afford hesitation. And in that suspended heartbeat, she understood. Row 13 would not be unlucky tonight. It would be where everything changed. The intercom's crackle still hung in the air like a jolt of electricity. "Ladies and gentlemen, if there is anyone aboard with pilot experience, please identify yourself immediately." A hush fell over the cabin. Passengers froze mid-breath, their casual routines abruptly stripped away. A toddler's whimper was swallowed by the oppressive silence. Luggage straps creaked as people shifted nervously, and somewhere near the rear a man muttered under his breath, "What the hell is going on?" Eyes darted toward the aisles, searching faces, scanning for the one person who could possibly save them from the unknown. The words echoed, repeating in Emma's mind like a warning drumbeat. Emma's heart slammed against her chest. Her eyelids, heavy only moments ago, snapped open. She sat upright, every nerve in her body suddenly alive, alert. The mundane world of travel, airports, boarding, luggage carts fell away. Now it was just her, the plane, and the unspoken terror lurking somewhere within the mechanical hum of the engines. She froze for a moment, disbelief mingling with instinct. Could this really be happening? The co-pilot must have, yes. The captain's voice sounded shaky, almost panicked. That wasn't the usual calm authority of a seasoned pilot speaking to his passengers. Something had gone catastrophically wrong. Emma's training surged to the surface. Emergency maneuvers, emergency landings, engine failures, procedural sequences drilled into her until her muscles remembered them even when her mind hesitated. "Excuse me, miss, are you a pilot?" a flight attendant asked, urgency in her voice as she hurried down the aisle toward row 13. The words barely registered. Emma's hands trembled as the reality settled in. Not hypotheticals, not simulations, real lives. People were looking to her. Every second she hesitated was another heartbeat closer to disaster. She swallowed, her throat dry, and spoke, voice low but firm. I'm trained, I can help." The stewardess froze, disbelief written across her face. "Are you serious?" "Yes," Emma said, the weight of conviction finally settling over her fear. "I can get in the cockpit. I need to see what's happening." The cabin's energy shifted. Whispers rippled through the rows like a slow-burning fuse. Eyes widened in astonishment, murmurs growing louder, speculation sparking like static electricity. A passenger, a fighter pilot, on this flight. Heads turned toward row 13, toward the woman who had been asleep moments ago, now alert and poised. Passengers reached for their phones, some to document the moment, others to contact loved ones. Emma barely noticed. She was already standing, shoulders squared, her backpack sliding off one arm as she followed the stewardess toward the cockpit. The metallic floor vibrated beneath her feet, every hum of the engines resonating with the tension thrumming through her veins. The captain's voice came again, this time strained, fragmented. "Flight 427, we were having technical issues, autopilot failing, co-pilot unconscious." Emma's stomach dropped. The gravity of the situation crystallized into a sharp, visceral reality. This was no routine call for help. The autopilot system had faltered, one pilot incapacitated, and the plane, heavy with 174 souls, was drifting precariously at 30,000 feet. She swallowed, tasting bile and determination simultaneously. As she approached the cockpit, the cabin's atmosphere thickened. Passengers clutched armrests, knuckles white, eyes wide with a mixture of fear and curiosity. A father in the row behind whispered, "Is she really going to fly the plane?" His voice trembled, half in hope, half in disbelief. Children sensed the tension too, fidgeting, holding toys, staring wide-eyed at the unknown. The cockpit door was ajar, light spilling from inside like a promise of both danger and salvation. Emma hesitated for a heartbeat, inhaling the metallic scent of the cabin, oil, electricity, fear, and then stepped inside. Inside, the scene was worse than she imagined. The captain slumped over one panel, sweat glistening on his forehead, eyes wide and unfocused. The co-pilot was pale, almost motionless, a damp cloth pressed to her brow. Warning lights blinked in rapid succession across the dashboard. Engine fluctuations, hydraulic warnings, autopilot failure. The plane shuddered under turbulent currents, buffeted by winds Emma could only guess at from the sudden jolts. "Thank God," the captain rasped, lifting his head to look at her. I don't know if you can." "I can," Emma interrupted, her voice firmer now, every syllable charged with a confidence she barely felt. "Show me the panels, Tell me the current status." He gestured weakly toward the array of buttons, switches, and digital displays, his hands trembling as he tried to stabilize the plane. Engines fluctuating, autopilot offline, we're losing altitude control. Emma's pulse raced. She scanned the cockpit with trained eyes, absorbing every detail: the throttle levers, the navigation system, fuel gauges, warning lights blinking in chaotic rhythm. Each system demanded respect. Each alarm demanded attention. Her hands hovered, memorized instinctively the layout she had studied so many times in simulations. But this wasn't a simulation. The vibrations of the plane, the real weight of passengers, the sheer unpredictability of weather, it all combined into a living, breathing crisis. A sudden jolt shook the fuselage violently. Passengers gasped, seatbelt signs blinking frantically. Emma gritted her teeth. Her heart thundered in her ears, but she forced herself to breathe in measured sequences. Inhale, count to 4, exhale, repeat. Fear was present, but it could not control her actions. She needed clarity, precision, and speed. She touched the throttle, feeling the slight give beneath her fingertips, coaxing it to stabilize. Alarms screamed, lights blinked. Outside, clouds churned like storm-tossed waves. Lightning fractured the sky in brilliant, jagged streaks. She could feel the aircraft responding to her adjustments, the subtle changes, the slight steadiness returning under her hands. The adrenaline surged, a cocktail of fear, determination, and exhilaration. "Passengers," the captain's voice broke over the intercom, weak but steady. "We have someone qualified now. Please remain calm. Follow crew instructions." The words barely penetrated the noise of gasps, murmurs, and the collective fear of nearly 200 people trapped in metal and altitude. Emma ignored it. She focused entirely on the instruments, reading patterns, adjusting controls, preparing for the next unpredictable surge of chaos. The stewardess returned briefly, whispering, "Passengers are nervous. Some are crying, some are trying to help." Emma nodded, though she had no time to console anyone. Every decision she made in the cockpit reverberated through the plane. Every flick of a switch, every nudge of a lever could mean life or death. Lightning struck closer, illuminating the cockpit like an unholy spotlight. Emma's gaze flicked from instruments to horizon, calculating, anticipating. She spoke aloud, not for the captain but for herself. "We can stabilize. We can make it. Just follow my lead." The captain's eyes met hers. Awe, disbelief, and relief mingled in their depths. I can't believe this," he muttered. "I never imagined." "Don't think," Emma said, voice cutting through panic like a blade. "Do." Outside, the plane rocked violently again. A collective gasp rose from the cabin, muffled by seatbacks and overhead compartments. Emma's fingers flew across the controls, adjusting rudder, stabilizing engines, recalculating descent trajectories. Sweat stung her eyes, her heart raced, but clarity and instinct ruled over fear. Every second stretched into an eternity. And then, in the midst of chaos, she realized. She was no longer a passenger. She was no longer a spectator. Row 13, seat F, the ordinary window seat she had chosen on a whim, had become the epicenter of salvation for everyone aboard Flight 427. For a brief, suspended heartbeat, the cabin outside the cockpit seemed frozen in time. Every life, every hope, every fear rested on her hands. The intercom was silent now, the storm outside relentless, and somewhere deep inside, Emma knew the real test had only just begun. The cockpit smelled of fear, oil, and the faint, acrid tang of overheated electronics. Emma stood over the controls, heart hammering, staring at the dizzying array of buttons, levers, and digital panels blinking red in urgent, insistent rhythm. The hum of the engines no longer comforted her. It was a living heartbeat, fragile and unpredictable. The co-pilot slumped motionless, and the captain's hands shook as he tried to stabilize the throttle. The plane was alive, dangerous, and volatile. Emma's training surged forward like a tidal wave. Months of simulations, of emergency drills, of split-second decision-making in virtual skis, all of it now mattered in the real world. Her fingers hovered over the throttle, over the rudder controls, over the instrument panels she had memorized but never fully touched in reality. Every second mattered, every decision could mean life or death. Her mind raced. The autopilot system had failed, and the engines were fluctuating. Turbulence battered the fuselage, sending a violent shudder through the aircraft. She could feel the strain in the metal under her hands, hear the subtle groans and creaks as though the plane itself were screaming. Passengers were unaware, yet she could sense their fear radiating from the cabin, amplified by the trembling in the floorboards and the nervous whispers floating up the aisles. Emma swallowed hard. The panic that had surged moments ago was still present, a cold hand gripping her chest, but she forced it down. Breathing in measured sequences, she told herself, "This is what I trained for. This is what I was born to do. Panic doesn't help anyone." The captain spoke, voice trembling but aware of her presence. "Engines 1 and 2 fluctuating, autopilot offline. We're losing altitude fast." His eyes searched hers, a silent plea for guidance. Emma nodded, acknowledging both his fear and his trust. "I can stabilize it," she said, "but we have to act immediately. Help me manage throttle adjustments and monitor the instruments." He nodded, a flicker of relief crossing his exhausted face. Together, they became a single unit of urgency. The co-pilot remained unconscious, a grim reminder of how fragile control was in this moment. Emma's hands moved instinctively, adjusting levers, pressing buttons, communicating with air traffic control. Outside, the clouds churned violently, and flashes of lightning revealed the plane's trajectory against the storm. "Emma, we're descending too rapidly," the captain shouted. "We need to correct before." "Not yet," she interrupted sharply. Her eyes scanned the panels, memorizing each flicker, each warning. She weighed calculations in milliseconds, recalling training that now felt simultaneously infinite and insufficient. Throttle 2, slight increase. Rudder adjust 5 degrees left. Watch for crosswind shear. Okay, now stabilize. The plane groaned in protest, shuddering as if resisting her commands. She felt a thrill of fear, the kind that tests the body and sharpens the mind. Sweat stung her eyes, but she ignored it. One wrong move, one hesitation, and the lives of everyone aboard, 174 souls, would end in chaos. A sudden jolt slammed the plane, throwing both her and the captain slightly forward. Passengers in the cabin cried out, some screaming, some silently clutching seatbelts and prayers. Emma's stomach lurched. Lightning illuminated the cabin in stark electric white, revealing frightened faces frozen in terror. She had no time to console anyone. Her focus was absolute. The controls were extensions of her body now, her instincts guiding each movement. "Altitude stabilizing slowly," she murmured, almost to herself. "Throttle 1 adjust, rudder neutral, flaps." Every word, every instruction was executed in near silence in the cockpit, punctuated only by alarms and the groan of stressed metal. The captain followed, hesitant but precise. Together, they wrestled the plane from the edge of disaster. Her mind flicked to the passengers behind her. She could imagine them, terrified, feeling the turbulence as she felt it, praying that someone, anyone, was in control. Her stomach churned. She had to remind herself, every adjustment, every correction mattered. They were counting on her. She wasn't allowed to fail. A piercing alarm shattered the temporary calm. Engine 3 on the right was losing pressure. Emma's stomach dropped. She had never faced a triple-engine failure at altitude in real life. Only simulations had prepared her for such a scenario. She had to act fast, her instincts blending with knowledge honed through years of relentless training. She reached for the emergency engine override, fingers trembling but steady. "Air traffic control," she said firmly, her voice now carrying the authority of command. "Flight 427 is experiencing multiple engine failures. We are engaging manual override, requesting immediate vectors for emergency landing." Static crackled over the intercom, followed by the calm but firm voice of a controller. "Flight 427, acknowledge emergency. We are coordinating runway clearance. Descend to 10,000 feet, heading 270. Emma's fingers flew over the controls, adjusting the descent, monitoring engine response, countering turbulence. Every movement required precision, timing, and judgment. She could feel the plane's weight, the inertia pushing her forward with every correction. A bead of sweat slid down her temple, but she ignored it, focusing on the rhythm of the instruments, the responses of the aircraft, the dance of survival she now commanded. The captain's voice broke through again. "Emma, I don't know if I've ever seen anyone handle this. You're incredible." His words, meant to reassure, only reminded her of the stakes. Incredible didn't mean invincible. Incredible didn't mean safe. Every second remained a precarious balance between life and death. Outside, the storm had intensified. Flashes of lightning revealed towering cumulonimbus clouds, torn by wind shear and electrical discharge. The plane lurched violently, metal screeching under stress. Emma adjusted the flaps, recalibrated the autopilot override, and engaged the remaining engine stabilizers. Each calculation was performed in milliseconds, each adjustment a gamble with gravity, wind, and her own confidence. Her mind flashed to the training that had pushed her to exhaustion countless times. She remembered the instructor's warnings: never hesitate, trust your instincts, anticipate chaos before it arrives. Now the advice was alive, tangible, and unforgiving. She anticipated, adjusted, and executed, sweat mixing with adrenaline, muscles coiled, nerves sharp. A warning light blinked: fuel imbalance. She assessed, recalculated. The plane groaned again, pitching slightly to the left. Emma countered, adjusting throttle and rudder, voice calm but commanding, correcting pitch, stabilizing steady. The captain looked at her, eyes wide. You're doing something remarkable." Emma nodded, silent, focusing on the instruments, the plane, the lives depending on her. Fear had become a tool, a sharpened edge that honed her reflexes and decisions. Each jolt, each shudder, each alarm became a signal, a guide to action. Outside, the passengers in the cabin clutched armrests, unaware of the battle being fought just a few feet away. They felt turbulence but not the precision, the split-second decisions, the intuition balancing raw physics and human skill. Emma felt it all, every vibration, every nuance, every potential catastrophe compressed into the cockpit. And then a fleeting sense of clarity emerged. She realized she wasn't just reacting. She was commanding, anticipating, controlling the chaos. The plane, though battered and screaming through the storm, was responding. Slowly, methodically, stability was returning. Not perfect, never perfect, but enough to prevent immediate disaster. For the first time in weeks, she allowed herself a brief, fleeting thought: I can do this. But the realization came with immediate caution. They were not yet safe. This was only the beginning. The storm outside, the damaged engines, the failing autopilot, everything still demanded vigilance. She had to stay sharp, precise, unyielding. Failure was not an option. And as the aircraft shuddered again, lightning slicing the sky outside, Emma Nolan understood fully for the first time that row 13, seat F, the seat she had chosen so casually, had become the fulcrum of survival. She was no longer asleep, no longer hidden. She was the pilot now, and the lives of everyone aboard Flight 427 rested squarely in her hands. The cockpit felt impossibly small, claustrophobic under the weight of emergency. Every panel, every lever, every blinking light demanded attention, yet Emma's focus narrowed until the world outside the cockpit seemed to blur. The storm was no longer a distant threat. It was a tangible force, hammering the fuselage, rattling her spine, testing every instinct she had ever trained for. She could feel the vibration in her hands, the subtle thrumming of the engines, the almost imperceptible shift of weight with each gust of wind. The captain's hand hovered uncertainly over the throttle. His eyes met hers, searching for reassurance, for direction, for hope. Emma exhaled, forcing herself to remain calm. She could sense the adrenaline surging through him, the fear barely contained behind his professional composure. "I need control," she said firmly. "We stabilize first, then assess. Follow my lead." He nodded, relinquishing the immediate control but remaining close, eyes flicking between instruments and her hands. Emma settled into the seat, her fingers resting lightly on the yoke. The hum of the aircraft was no longer background. It was a language she could read, vibrations translating into information her mind processed automatically. Her eyes scanned the panels, noting engine pressures, fuel flow, altitude readings, airspeed, and navigation displays. Every second counted. A violent jolt shook the plane, throwing her forward slightly. The captain muttered under his breath, "Crosswind is brutal, hold on." Emma's stomach lurched. Her hands moved instantly, correcting the roll, adjusting throttle, nudging the rudder. Sweat stung her eyes as she worked, each flick of a switch precise, each adjustment a calculated response to the turbulent air. The co-pilot remained slumped, unconscious, a reminder that every single person's survival depended on her skill and composure. She could almost feel the collective heartbeat of the cabin behind her, a symphony of fear and reliance. Passengers were unaware of the battle being fought just inches away, but their fate depended entirely on her decisions. "Engine stabilizing slightly," she murmured. "Throttle 1 maintain. Engine 2 minor adjustment. Flaps 20 degrees now." Her voice carried authority, a mix of command and reassurance, cutting through the alarms and the groan of stressed metal. The plane responded, sluggishly but perceptibly, tilting less violently, rising fractionally from the steep descent. Outside, the storm roared. Lightning split the sky in jagged arcs, illuminating the clouds like an apocalyptic strobe. Wind shear battered the plane, throwing it side to side. Passengers gripped armrests, voices choked with terror. Emma felt it all, the turbulence, the weight of responsibility, the tangible danger pressing down on her. Her instincts honed through years of fighter jet training kicked in. She anticipated, reacted, and adapted with precision honed by countless hours in simulated emergencies. The captain's voice broke the rhythm, shaky but present. "I've never seen anyone handle this. You're incredible." Emma's lips pressed together. Praise had no place here. There was no room for ego, only action. "Focus," she said softly, almost to herself. "We have a job, every second counts." She adjusted the yoke, stabilizing the plane's pitch. Alarms continued to blare, but she filtered through them, prioritizing critical warnings over minor alerts. Her mind worked in high-speed cycles: scan, assess, react, adjust, repeat. Every movement mattered. Outside, clouds thrashed violently, and rain pelted the fuselage like tiny hammers. The plane groaned, metal straining under nature's assault. Emma's mind flashed to her training. Emergency landings, engine failures, sudden decompression, crosswind correction. Everything she had practiced now mattered, but reality was far more unforgiving than any simulator. This was metal, gravity, and chaos, all of it alive, unpredictable, and deadly. One miscalculation could cascade into disaster. She tightened her grip, recalibrated the rudder, and leveled the wings with delicate, precise movements. The captain leaned closer, pointing at a blinking warning light. "Fuel imbalance, left wing." Emma's eyes darted to the gauge. "Minor shift," she calculated quickly. "Adjust trim 20 degrees right, compensate with aileron. Watch altitude, don't overcorrect." She executed the maneuver fluidly, muscles and mind synchronized. The plane responded, the slight tilt correcting, engines humming steadier. Another jolt rocked the aircraft, and she reacted instantly, hands flying over the controls with practiced precision. She could feel her own heartbeat pounding, a metronome matching the plane's trembling. She swallowed hard, tasting copper on her tongue, adrenaline thick in her veins. Each second was a battle, every motion deliberate. She reminded herself, fear is a tool, not a master. Control it, harness it, use it to focus. The storm outside intensified further. Lightning split the clouds in violent arcs, thunder rolling like cannon fire. The plane pitched violently, sending a ripple of panic through the cabin. Emma adjusted throttle, flaps, and rudder simultaneously, coordinating movements that would have been impossible for a novice. Sweat ran down her temples, streaking her face, but she didn't falter. She had become a conduit between chaos and order, a linchpin holding the aircraft together. Her thoughts flicked to the passengers behind her, families, business travelers, students returning home, unaware that their survival depended on the woman who had slept moments ago in row 13. She didn't allow herself the luxury of doubt. Every second mattered. Every fraction of a degree, every adjustment was crucial. The captain cleared his throat, voice trembling with awe and relief. "I don't know if I've ever seen." Emma cut him off, voice firm. "Focus on monitoring instruments. We land this plane, that's the priority." The storm was relentless. The plane shuddered again, twisting in the wind, and alarms screamed. Engine 2 sputtered, warning lights flashing. Emma's fingers moved instinctively, stabilizing, coaxing the engine back into functional rhythm. Her mind processed data faster than any human should: airspeed, altitude, engine response, wind velocity, turbulence patterns. Every parameter had to be accounted for, every adjustment precise. Outside, passengers clung to armrests, whispered prayers, and prayed for the unknown hero guiding the metal bird through the storm. Emma felt their presence, their fear, their hope, pressing on her as a tangible weight. She drew in a deep breath and centered herself, transforming the panic into laser-sharp focus. The co-pilot remained unconscious, the captain exhausted, relying on her instinct and precision. Emma realized the magnitude of what she had done. She was no longer just a passenger, no longer just a trained pilot. She had become the lifeline, the bridge between survival and catastrophe. Lightning flashed again, illuminating the cockpit in stark electric white. Emma's eyes flicked to the instruments and then the horizon. She adjusted the yoke, stabilized the descent, and began plotting the path to the nearest safe runway. Her mind worked at hyperspeed, calculations overlapping, adjustments flowing seamlessly. She was no longer fighting fear, she was mastering it. The storm raged, the plane groaned, and passengers braced themselves. But in the cockpit, a single fact was undeniable. Emma Nolan, who had been asleep moments ago in row 13, seat F, had stepped forward and taken control. She had transformed from an unnoticed traveler into the pivotal force keeping Flight 427 in the sky. And as the storm battered the fuselage, she knew this was only the beginning of the fight to bring everyone home alive. Lightning split the sky in jagged, violent arcs as Flight 427 lurched violently. The plane pitched to the left, sending a ripple of panic through the cabin. Passengers screamed, their voices blending with the roaring engines, the creak of stressed metal, and the alarms that screamed relentlessly across the cockpit. Emma Nolan's stomach dropped. Sweat ran down her temples, stinging her eyes, but she didn't flinch. She was acutely aware of every vibration, every subtle change, every heartbeat aboard the aircraft. "Engine 2 is losing power," the captain shouted, voice strained with urgency. He had leaned forward, gripping the console like a lifeline, but it was Emma's hands on the controls now. The co-pilot remained unconscious, the third member of the cockpit absent in every meaningful way. Emma's fingers flew over the throttle, stabilizing the engines as best she could. She drew on every drill, every simulation, every hour of rigorous preparation. Outside, the storm raged like a living entity. Wind slammed against the fuselage, whipping the plane violently, shaking it as if it were a toy. Rain pelted the windows in sheets, reducing visibility to almost nothing. The plane groaned in protest under the strain, and each jolt sent Emma's stomach into a painful twist. The passengers behind her felt only turbulence, unaware of the life-and-death calculations being executed just feet away in the cockpit. Emma's mind raced. She assessed the status. Engines 1 and 2 were fluctuating dangerously. The rudder had begun to lag under the crosswind shear, and autopilot was completely offline. She could hear the alarms, each shrill tone a warning, a lifeline, a countdown. Her training had prepared her for some of these situations individually, but never simultaneously, never with real lives at stake. Throttle 1 full adjustment. Rudder slight left. "Flaps 25 degrees, she commanded, her voice firm, cutting through the chaos. The captain followed, adjusting as instructed, his trust in her absolute despite his exhaustion and disbelief. Together they formed a delicate rhythm, a partnership forged under fire, maneuvering the plane through turbulent chaos. A sudden jolt threw both of them forward, rattling the instruments and sending alarms into a frenetic chorus. Emma's stomach lurched violently. "Brace for turbulence," she shouted instinctively, more for the passengers than herself. Her hands moved faster now, compensating for the violent gusts, stabilizing the plane with tiny, precise adjustments. Every second was a battle against gravity, wind, and human error. "Emma, the cabin people are panicking," the captain said, his voice strained. He indicated the intercom. "We need to keep them calm or we risk hysteria." Emma nodded, heart hammering, and picked up the microphone. Her voice, calm but authoritative, echoed through the cabin. "Ladies and gentlemen, please remain seated and fasten your seatbelts. We are experiencing severe turbulence. I assure you, the crew and I are managing the situation. Stay calm, follow instructions, and trust us to get you through this safely." Silence followed her words. Whimpers replaced screams and a few passengers whispered prayers. Emma's heart softened momentarily, but she could not afford to be distracted. Not now. Not ever. The storm outside was relentless, the plane's mechanical failures persistent, and time slipping away with every jolt. "Emma, we're losing altitude rapidly," the captain warned. The plane tilted sharply, throwing them off balance again. Sweat stung her eyes. Her fingers moved instinctively across the controls, adjusting throttle, rudder, and flaps in near-simultaneous action. She fought the rising panic in her chest, channeling it into precision, into focus. Each adjustment slowed the descent, but the aircraft remained unsteady, buffeted by winds that refused to yield. A sudden shriek of metal tore through the fuselage. A wing panel had loosened under the pressure. Emma felt it in her bones, a sharp tremor through the controls. She recalibrated the rudder, countered the roll, and coaxed the engines to stabilize. The plane responded slightly, but the storm was relentless, like a beast unwilling to release its grip. She glanced at the captain, whose face was pale, etched with worry, yet alive with a flicker of awe. I can't believe this," he muttered, almost to himself. "You're keeping us alive." Emma's jaw tightened. Praise was a luxury she could not afford. "Stay focused," she said. "Altitude control first, then engine adjustments. We land this plane safely, or none of us survive." The cockpit was alive with alarms and flashing lights. Engine 3 sputtered violently, threatening to fail entirely. Emma's hands moved faster, coordinating throttle, rudder, and flaps with an almost unnatural synchronicity. Each adjustment demanded both precision and speed. Hesitation was fatal. She drew on every ounce of training, every drill, every near miss in the simulator that now felt like life preparation. Outside, passengers clutched armrests, their knuckles white, faces pale. The storm tore through the clouds, rain hammering the fuselage, wind twisting the plane, each shudder and groan an unspoken warning. Emma could sense their fear as a tangible weight pressing on her, yet she did not falter. She embraced it, allowing the pressure to sharpen her instincts, to guide her precision. A new warning blared: hydraulic failure. Emma's stomach knotted. She assessed the panel quickly, partial loss of hydraulic pressure affecting landing gear and flaps. She recalibrated immediately, adjusting manually. The plane shuddered again, groaning under stress, but she coaxed it into a more stable attitude, each movement precise, deliberate. The captain leaned back slightly, exhausted, yet relieved. "I've never seen anyone handle anything like this," he whispered. Emma did not respond. Words were unnecessary. Her eyes were glued to the instrument, scanning every readout, anticipating the plane's next reaction. Another gust hit, pitching the aircraft violently, throwing a few instruments askew. She reacted instantly, adjusting throttle, rudder, and flaps simultaneously. The plane groaned, pitched, then slowly, agonizingly responded. Stability, partial but enough, returned. The passengers' screams had subsided to whispers. They still clutched armrests, eyes wide, praying, crying, but alive. Emma felt a flicker of satisfaction but did not allow herself relief. The storm was relentless, The plane fragile, the engines unreliable. She had stabilized, yes, but survival still hung by a thread. Lightning illuminated the cockpit, the storm painting stark shadows across the worn faces of the pilots. Emma's own face was streaked with sweat, her hands trembling slightly despite the calm precision of her movements. She realized the enormity of what had happened. She had taken control in a crisis few could imagine, in a storm that tested even the most seasoned pilots, and she was keeping everyone alive. But there was no time to celebrate. She had done more than react. She had taken command, she had orchestrated the chaos, and she had done it with lives on the line. Yet the storm continued to rage, engines wavered, alarms screamed. She drew a deep breath, centering herself, and prepared for the next wave of turbulence, the next test of skill and courage. Emma Nolan, who had slept moments ago in row 13, seat F, had become the fulcrum of Flight 427's survival. Every passenger, every crew member, every life depended on her. And in that cockpit, amidst the alarms, lightning, and shrieking wind, she realized the truth. She was no longer just a pilot. She was the only thing standing between the living and the catastrophe that roared outside. The cockpit lights flickered in sync with the storm outside, casting an eerie glow across the panels and the pilots' faces. Emma Nolan's knuckles were white against the yoke, sweat streaming down her temples, her uniform clinging uncomfortably to her back. The plane groaned under the relentless assault of wind and rain, each shudder a stark reminder of how fragile metal was against nature's fury. Engine 2 sputtered again, threatening complete failure. Every warning light screamed in her vision, but she could not allow panic to touch her. "Emma, we have to descend immediately," the captain said, voice strained. His hands hovered, trembling slightly over the manual controls, ready to assist if needed. "Runway clearance is only available in 10 minutes trajectory. We don't have time to delay." Emma exhaled slowly, forcing calm into her voice as she keyed the microphone. "Tower, Flight 427 requesting emergency descent. Engines unstable, autopilot offline, co-pilot unconscious. Guidance requested for immediate runway approach. Confirm vectors and clearance." Static buzzed through the intercom, followed by a clipped, professional voice. "Flight 427, emergency descent authorized. Vectoring to runway 27R, maintain heading 270. Descend to 10,000 feet immediately. Wind shear reported along approach. Keep steady and report any loss of engine performance." Emma nodded, even though no one could see her. The calm, clipped instructions from air traffic control were a lifeline, a thread connecting her to hope. She adjusted throttle, flaps, and rudder in near-simultaneous movements, coordinating descent, stabilizing engines, and compensating for violent gusts. Each adjustment was a battle against physics and the storm's relentless fury. "Altitude dropping too fast," the captain shouted, his voice nearly lost amid the alarms. He gestured toward the instruments, eyes wide with tension. Emma's fingers moved instinctively, adjusting throttle 1 and 2, nudging the rudder and applying subtle aileron corrections. The plane groaned, resisting, but gradually complied. She could almost feel the fuselage bending under the wind's weight, the engines straining to keep her control steady. Passengers braced themselves. The sudden, violent drop sent them slamming against their seatbelts, hearts hammering, breaths caught. Some prayed, others whispered reassurances to crying children, none fully understanding the magnitude of what was happening at the cockpit just a few feet away. Emma could feel their fear as a tangible force pressing down, but she channeled it into focus. Every heartbeat mattered. Every second mattered. Lightning split the sky, illuminating the storm clouds like jagged electric cliffs. The plane pitched violently, then stabilized under Emma's steadying hands. "Throttle 3, stabilize," she muttered under her breath. Instruments flashed warnings, hydraulic systems faltering, fuel imbalance shifting slightly to the left wing, wind shear detected on approach. Emma's mind worked faster than any simulation ever demanded, multitasking, calculating, predicting, reacting. The captain leaned back, a rare moment of relief in his exhausted eyes. "Emma, you're incredible. I don't know how." "Focus," she snapped, cutting off his praise. There was no room for hesitation or admiration here. Every word, every movement was a life-or-death decision. She was a conductor in a symphony of chaos, guiding a fragile metal bird through a storm that refused to relent. Another violent gust threw the plane into a sudden roll. Emma's stomach lurched, muscles tensing instinctively. The wings groaned, rivets screaming under stress. She adjusted the yoke, nudged the rudder, and countered the roll with precise, deliberate movements. The plane righted itself, albeit precariously. "Hold steady, steady," she whispered, eyes flicking across the instruments. Outside, the storm intensified, a living, chaotic entity battering the fuselage. Rain stung the windows like bullets, lightning arced closer with each flash, illuminating the panic-stricken passengers inside. Emma could hear their muffled cries, the whimpers of children, the trembling of those clinging desperately to hope. She felt their collective fear as a physical weight pressing on her shoulders. A sharp alarm blared, engine 1 was faltering, fuel pressure dropping. Emma's stomach clenched, but she acted without hesitation. Throttle 1, maximum stabilization, adjust flaps to 20 degrees, compensate with rudder 5 degrees right, monitor fuel flow. The plane responded sluggishly but remained under control. Another jolt shook the fuselage, rattling instruments and alarms. Sweat poured down her back, but she did not falter. The captain's voice broke through the chaos again, strained but steady. "Emma, I've flown thousands of hours, faced emergencies, but this is extraordinary." She ignored him, eyes locked on the horizon, instruments, and the storm's unpredictable patterns. She was not extraordinary. She was necessary. Every calculation, every adjustment, every split-second decision was about survival for herself, the crew, and the 174 passengers behind her. The plane trembled as it descended through turbulent air. Lightning illuminated the clouds, revealing their immense, rolling walls, towers of vapor and electric fury. Rain hammered the fuselage, gusts pitched the plane side to side, and alarms screamed with renewed intensity. Emma's fingers danced across the controls, her mind orchestrating a delicate balance between mechanical limitations and environmental chaos. "Altitude 10,500 feet," she muttered. "Almost there. Adjust throttle 3. Rudder, slight left, flaps 25. The plane responded gradually, her precision the difference between controlled descent and catastrophic failure. Passengers clutched seatbelts, closed their eyes, whispered prayers. The turbulence was merciless, tossing bodies like rag dolls against seat restraints. Emma barely noticed. Her focus was absolute, every control input, every decision calibrated for survival. She had become the center of the storm, the pivot on which the plane's fate balanced. Another violent shake sent alarms blaring. Engine 2 sputtered. Emma's stomach clenched again. She could feel the engine straining under the storm's force. She adjusted throttle, compensated with flaps and rudder, carefully balancing fuel pressure across all 3 engines. Her eyes flicked between the horizon and the instruments, calculating descent trajectory, speed, and stability. Tower, Flight 427, approaching 10,000 feet. Engines unstable but stabilized temporarily. Request final approach vectors for emergency landing. Static, then a calm, professional voice. Flight 427, vectoring you to runway 27R, maintain heading 270. Wind shear remains severe. Descent verified. Keep steady and report any sudden changes. Emma nodded to herself, hands gripping the yoke tightly. "We can do this," she whispered. The thought was almost private, but it grounded her, centered her, giving her the focus to continue guiding the plane through the storm. The storm outside showed no mercy. Lightning arced dangerously close, thunder shaking the fuselage. Gusts of wind battered the plane, tilting it violently. Passengers screamed, some crying outright. Emma's heart ached at their fear, but she allowed the emotion to sharpen her focus rather than distract her. Every adjustment mattered, every calculation counted. "Captain, keep monitoring instruments. I'll handle descent. Alert me immediately if any engine drops below critical," she instructed. "Yes, ma'am," he replied, voice steady despite exhaustion. Another jolt, another groan of stressed metal, but the plane responded, slowly regaining relative stability. Emma adjusted throttle, nudged rudder, calibrated flaps. The descent continued, each 1,000 feet closer to the Earth, bringing the possibility of safety, but also the risk of catastrophe. She could feel it, the storm's relentlessness, the engine's fragility, the plane's mechanical strain. Yet, through every jolt, every alarm, every cry from the cabin, Emma remained calm, precise, and unwavering. She had become the linchpin of Flight 427's survival. And as the plane continued its perilous descent toward the emergency runway, Emma realized something profound. She was no longer just a passenger, no longer merely a pilot. She was the difference between survival and disaster. And now, there was no turning back. The plane lurched violently, thrown by crosswinds like a leaf in a storm. Lightning split the sky in brilliant, jagged streaks, illuminating the terrified faces of passengers in fleeting bursts of white light. Rain hammered the fuselage, making each jolt feel like a collision. Emma Nolan's hands were locked on the yoke, her fingers raw from the pressure, knuckles white, every nerve straining with focus. She could hear alarms screaming across the cockpit, but her mind filtered the noise, translating each warning into a precise corrective action. "Altitude 5,000 feet, the captain shouted, tension thick in his voice. "Runway still 5 minutes ahead, wind sheer." "Focus," Emma snapped, cutting him off mid-sentence. There was no time for panic. Each second was a delicate calculation, a blend of physics, instinct, and sheer nerve. She adjusted throttle, nudged the rudder, compensated for turbulence, flaps deployed incrementally. The plane groaned, tilted violently to the right, but she held steady. Her eyes scanned the horizon and the instruments simultaneously. The storm was relentless. Gusts buffeted the wings, thunder boomed like artillery, and lightning illuminated the clouds with an almost supernatural intensity. Outside, the runway remained obscured by sheets of rain and fog. Emma's heart pounded, not just with fear, but with the precise focus that had been her lifeline throughout this ordeal. "Engine stabilizing?" she asked, voice steady despite the chaos. "For now," the captain replied, voice taut, "but we're stretched to the limit, one more jolt and—" "I know," Emma said, cutting him off again. Words were irrelevant. Action mattered. She monitored the fuel pressure, adjusted throttle across the engines, stabilized the pitch, compensated for roll, and recalculated descent trajectory. Each adjustment was the difference between controlled approach and catastrophic failure. Lightning flashed close, illuminating the wings as they flexed under the storm's assault. A shudder ran through the fuselage, metal groaning under strain. Emma felt the vibration through her fingertips and interpreted it instinctively. The plane was fatigued but responsive. She guided it delicately, coaxing it toward stability with movements precise enough to counter the storm's force. "Runway in sight," the captain shouted, voice tinged with disbelief and relief. "Emma, you." "Eyes on instruments," she snapped, refocusing. The runway's lights barely penetrated the curtain of rain, a fragile string of gold through the storm. Emma aligned the plane, using every ounce of skill to counter wind shear, turbulence, and the plane's compromised systems. The flaps were adjusted carefully, the throttle modulated with millimeter precision, and the rudder nudged continuously to maintain alignment. The cabin was a mix of muted terror and tentative hope. Passengers clutched seatbelts, whispered prayers, and gasped with every violent movement of the aircraft. They could sense the severity of the storm, but had no idea of the complexity and danger being navigated by the woman in row 13. She was unseen, a silent guardian, the only thing standing between them and catastrophe. Another violent gust slammed the plane. Instruments blinked warnings, engines sputtered, flaps shuddered. Emma's heart raced, but her hands moved with instinctive precision. She adjusted rudder and aileron, nudged throttle and coaxed the plane back to a stable glide. Hold steady, she muttered, almost a mantra to herself. The captain leaned forward, sweat dripping down his temple. Emma, you've done what no one expected. We're alive because of you. She did not respond. Words had no place here. Focus was her only ally. She guided the plane toward the runway, accounting for turbulence, unstable engines, and the relentless storm. Each second was a battle against physics, gravity, and the merciless wind. The final approach was the ultimate test. Crosswinds howled, gusts threatened to roll the plane, and each adjustment demanded split-second judgment. She could see the runway lights flickering through the rain, and she adjusted throttle and flaps to compensate for the diminishing visibility. The plane shuddered violently, and the alarm screamed again. Her stomach lurched, but her hands never wavered. "Altitude 500 feet, the captain called, voice tight with tension. "You're almost there." Emma's mind worked faster than ever. She calculated descent rate, angle of approach, and wind correction simultaneously. She nudged the yoke, adjusted throttle, and modulated flaps, guiding the plane like a conductor controlling a delicate symphony. Outside, the storm's fury continued, but within the cockpit she had created a pocket of precision and control. Lightning split the sky again, revealing the runway in its fleeting glow. She aligned the plane, adjusted for final wind corrections, and prepared for touchdown. Her fingers danced over the controls, guiding the aircraft with a grace and precision that belied the chaos outside. Every passenger, every soul aboard, relied on her ability to translate fear into survival. The engines faltered briefly, sending a shudder through the fuselage. Emma's stomach tightened, but she did not falter. Throttle adjustments, rudder nudges, flaps recalibration, every command was executed flawlessly. She could feel the plane responding, inch by agonizing inch. "Brace for landing," she shouted through the intercom, urgency lacing her calm tone. Passengers obeyed instantly, their bodies tensing against the seatbelts, eyes wide, whispers of prayer filling the cabin. Emma exhaled, centering herself. There was no room for fear, only action. The runway approached rapidly, a ribbon of light through the storm. Emma lowered the landing gear manually, checking each gauge. She adjusted throttle and rudder carefully, compensating for crosswinds that threatened to toss the plane sideways. The fuselage shuddered violently as the plane neared the tarmac. Thunder roared like cannon fire, lightning flashed in blinding bursts, and rain pelted the fuselage in relentless sheets. Emma's hands never wavered. Every calculation, every adjustment, every muscle memory honed over years of training was now in play. The plane's nose dipped, then leveled, the runway rushing toward them with terrifying speed. "Landing confirmed in 30 seconds, the captain said, voice tight with awe. Emma tightened her grip, nudged the yoke, and modulated the throttle. The wheels touched down with a violent jolt, the fuselage rebounding slightly before settling. She applied brakes carefully, countering wind shear and the slick tarmac, coaxing the plane to a stop. Alarms blared briefly, then fell silent as the plane slowed. The storm still raged around them, rain hammering the fuselage, wind threatening, but the aircraft was finally on the ground. Emma exhaled, allowing herself a fleeting sense of relief, though she remained vigilant. The passengers erupted in applause, cheers, and tears of relief filling the cabin. The captain turned to her, eyes wide with disbelief and gratitude. "Emma, you saved all of us. I don't know how to thank you. That was nothing short of miraculous." Emma nodded, voice barely above a whisper. "We're not done yet. Stay alert until the engines are fully off." The plane taxied to the gate, engines groaning but functional, passengers clapping and sobbing, some reaching for phones to call loved ones. Emma's hands finally relaxed from the yoke, but the adrenaline still coursed through her veins. She had faced the storm, the mechanical failures, and the chaos, and prevailed. Row 13, Seat F, once just another ordinary passenger seat, had become the center of survival, a pivot on which the fate of 174 lives balanced. Emma had slept there only hours ago. Now she had mastered a storm that would challenge even the most seasoned pilots. And though the cheers and relief filled the cabin, she knew one truth above all. Courage and skill were not always visible, but they could save lives in ways no one could predict. The plane had finally come to a stop. Rain continued to lash against the windows, but the storm was now a distant roar, no longer a threat. The passengers remained in their seats, shaking, tears streaming down faces, hands pressed to mouths in disbelief. Some whispered prayers of thanks, others clutched loved ones, still grappling with the realization that they had survived a near-catastrophic disaster. The cabin smelled of sweat, fear, and relief, a potent mix that hung thick in the air. Emma Nolan finally loosened her grip on the yoke. Her hands were sore, her uniform soaked with sweat, and her hair plastered to her forehead. She could feel every muscle trembling from tension and adrenaline, yet her mind was sharp, still scanning the instruments, still calculating. She had guided Flight 427 through the storm, stabilized failing engines, compensated for wind shear, and executed a landing that many experienced pilots might have deemed impossible. The captain finally exhaled, leaning back in his seat, visibly exhausted but alive. "Emma, I don't even know what to say," he murmured, voice thick with emotion. "You saved everyone. Every single life on this plane was in your hands and you brought us through it. I've never witnessed anything like this." Emma shook her head, brushing strands of wet hair from her face. She didn't answer. Words were insufficient. Her focus shifted instinctively to the passengers, many of whom were now attempting to unbuckle, some too weak from fear to move without assistance. Flight attendants moved swiftly down the aisles, helping, reassuring, their own relief evident. One young mother hugged her children tightly, whispering thanks repeatedly. An elderly man pressed his hands together, tears running down his cheeks. A teenage boy looked wide-eyed at the cockpit, muttering under his breath, "That woman, she saved us all." Emma remained silent, allowing their gratitude to wash over her without interruption. She didn't need accolades. Her purpose had always been clear: survival. Outside the plane, emergency crews had already arrived, lights flashing through the rain, engines idling, ready to assist any passengers who needed immediate attention. Emma stepped carefully down the aisle, assisting those who were unsteady, offering calm reassurance. Each step was still cautious, every movement deliberate. The adrenaline was still high, yet a sense of exhaustion pressed upon her, a reminder that the storm might be over, but the toll remained. When the last passenger had exited, she finally made her way to the tarmac. The storm had relented, leaving a heavy mist in the air, but the rain continued to fall in gentle sheets. Cameras and reporters were already arriving, alerted by the airport authorities. Flashing lights reflected off the wet runway, illuminating Emma's drenched figure. She had expected anonymity. She had never sought recognition. But now she was the focus of awe and relief, a living testament to courage and skill. A senior airport official approached, eyes wide. "Miss Nolan, everyone is talking about what happened," he said, voice trembling slightly. "Flight 427, they're calling it miraculous. Can you tell us what happened?" Emma took a deep breath. She thought of the storm, the trembling engines, the co-pilot unconscious, the captain relying on her instincts. She thought of the passengers' fear, the sickening jolts of turbulence, and the precise calculations that had kept them alive. "I did what I had to," she said softly, voice steady despite exhaustion. "We all did our part. The storm, it's relentless. But preparation, focus, and quick action can make the difference between survival and disaster." The official nodded, clearly in awe. "They're calling you a hero, and rightly so. The captain's report will make it official, but I think you need to know, Flight 427 will never forget this, and neither will the world." Emma nodded but didn't dwell on it. She walked back toward the plane, ensuring all passengers had safely disembarked, helping where needed, silent and deliberate. Her role as a pilot was never about recognition. It was about responsibility. And in that moment, responsibility had been absolute. Meanwhile, the media had already begun to circulate images of the storm-lashed runway, the damaged plane, and a single, drenched figure descending the steps. Social media erupted. News anchors repeated the story. Flight 427, a near-catastrophic storm, an unconscious co-pilot and a passenger-turned-pilot who saved everyone aboard. Comments poured in, disbelief mingling with admiration. Who is this woman? Row 13, Seat F, incredible. She's a hero beyond measure. Inside, the passengers were still processing. Some laughed with relief, others cried. One man approached Emma, shaking slightly. "I don't know your name, but I want to thank you. You kept my family alive." Emma offered a small nod, squeezing his hand briefly. Words were unnecessary. The shared understanding of survival, of fear overcome and life preserved, was enough. The captain eventually emerged from the cockpit, still pale but smiling. "Emma, you've set a standard none of us will ever forget. That landing, I can't imagine anyone else making it through like you did." Emma shook her head. "We did it together," she said. She thought of the captain, the flight attendants, and the passengers who had remained calm in chaos. Survival had been collective, even if her actions had been central. Hours later, the airport held a debrief. Flight 427's crew, Emma, and authorities reviewed every moment: storm trajectory, engine performance, emergency response. Engineers marveled at how she had stabilized the failing engines, maintained heading, and executed a precise emergency landing. Pilots praised her calm under pressure, her instant decision-making, and her seamless coordination with air traffic control. For some, it was the story of a lifetime. For Emma, it was another day at work, but with the profound understanding that preparation, courage, and composure could mean the difference between life and death. The news coverage continued late into the evening. Headlines proclaimed her heroism. Row 13 hero. Woman saves Flight 427 from disaster and passenger pilot. How Emma Nolan landed a plane in a furious storm. Social media exploded. Passengers sharing photos, videos, and first-hand accounts. The world learned her name, and the story of Flight 427 became instant legend. Yet amid the acclaim, Emma remained humble. She sat quietly in the airport lounge, sipping water, reflecting on the storm, the engines, the split-second decisions, and the passengers' frightened faces. She thought of the fear, the adrenaline, the impossible calculations, and the precise maneuvers that had carried them to safety. Heroism, she realized, was not about recognition. It was about the choice to act decisively when everything else teetered on the brink of chaos. Later, the passengers began reaching out individually. Messages, calls, and even personal letters poured in. Gratitude for saving their lives, admiration for her skill, and awe at her composure under unimaginable pressure. For some, she had become more than a pilot. She was a symbol of hope, courage, and the unyielding power of human capability. Emma finally allowed herself a moment to breathe. The storm outside had passed. The plane rested safely, and every passenger was alive. She had slept in row 13 only hours ago. Now, she had saved 174 lives at 30,000 feet, confronted a storm that defied reason, and emerged not just as a pilot, but as a hero in the eyes of everyone who had survived. And as she looked out over the rain-soaked tarmac, watching the last emergency vehicles depart and the passengers disperse into the night, Emma understood something profound. Sometimes, extraordinary moments find ordinary people, and the courage to act, even when no one expects it, is what separates survival from disaster. Row 13, Seat F, once unremarkable, ordinary, and unnoticed, had become the seat from which a woman changed the fate of 174 souls, and the world would never forget it.